Be humble. You're not going to be right all the time. And the one way to guarantee that you do have some success once you get going is build it into your culture that you're data driven. Let the data be the answer, not your ego.
So, welcome to our 17th episode of Leading with Relevance. It's a podcast series featuring some of today's most prominent leaders. I like to say it's people busting through the status quo and impacting companies and communities. Our goal is to interview and highlight personal and professional journeys for each leader's why, as Simon Sinek would say. And for listeners, we hope you'll find some practical insights that you can apply to your pathway. I'm Tino Mantella, Chief Strategy Officer of Relevance, loving the opportunity to talk and learn from leaders. I always find something that I learn in all these interviews, so I love that part of it. You'll get a podcast on our website. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing Klaus. Chris is the CEO of Fusen World, startup community for students to power their ideas. He's also the co-founder and partner of CyberLaunch VC, the world's leading accelerator for startups in security and machine learning space, and the co-founder and investor of NeuroLaunch, the world's first accelerator program for early stage startups related to neuroscience. History of innovation, the co-founder and CEO of Caneva, so going back a little bit, remember the days when I was running Technology Association of Georgia and Chris was standing that up. It's an online world populated by people in business, and he did that from '04 to 22, and also auto recruitment from 2013 to 2022, which is a patient recruitment company. And then he's the founder and CTO of ISS. And for those that are around in the early 2000s, you may remember Internet Security Systems ended up selling for $1.3 billion in 2006, which I think at the time, and we'll double check with Chris, was sold to IBM. But I think at the time it was one of the largest, if not the largest, private sale of any company in Georgia. He's very active in the community, foundation trustee at Georgia Tech, SCAD Board of Visitors, advisory board of Hands On Atlanta, and a trustee at Arts for Learning at Woodruff. Over the past decade, Chris and his team have been first investors in over 100 companies. And you'll hear this theme throughout in terms of Chris's passion to support startups. And the Klaus Startup Challenge is designed to spur on first-time entrepreneurs. Winning teams receive 150 grand in investment and access to CreateX launch connection to Georgia Tech. And then there's the Klaus Advanced Computing Building at Georgia Tech. Three-story building houses a portion of the College of Computing and Engineering related to programs. So that's a lot, but Chris, you've done a lot. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Tina. Good to be here.
So I like to start out always with, a question kind of foundational of what shaped you growing up, early part of your life, maybe a snapshot of two or three people that influenced you.
Sure. I guess early on in my childhood that played a couple big roles for me and kind of contribute to my journey and my success. I'd say um, one was just probably being into video games, playing
Yeah.
video games as a kid, but also um, getting so excited about video games. I was like, I wonder if I could make my own, and that kind of gave me a purpose around how do I learn how to program to make a game? How do I make sounds? How do I make, sprites or graphics happen on the computer screen? And a lot learning how to do all that. That's kind of put me on the path of how do I create on the computer. And that led up to getting early access to the internet. And I think with that, that kind of took me down a path of security, just getting on early and trying to get access to uh, more information. And I was interested in hacking, and so that all played the role in ultimately what became internet security systems. And then I'd say a big figure in my life that helped me kind of have the grounding to do a startup, I would actually attribute my grandmother who lived in Georgia for multiple reasons. One is she lived in Roswell, just north of Atlanta, and she was one of the big factors of why I picked Georgia Tech. That got me from Florida to Georgia. But she also early on would meditate, and sit there and I'd
Uh,
ask her, like, what are you doing? And she's,
yeah.
I'm meditating, and I was like, oh, what is this? And I actually got into meditation myself, and I found that practice was helpful for me because it helps you focus, it helps you think through your emotions, helps you kind of connect with, are you on the right path? And I think that also gave me confidence to take a break from Georgia Tech, go pursue a startup. And so lots of major decisions in my life, I think I felt grounded through meditation. And I always look back at, why did I do that? And I think that was one of the big factors is my grandmother and her teaching me how to meditate, and then
Interesting.
coupling that together with hacking and security and video games kind of was the foundation of my entree into startups.
So I'm guessing well before Georgia Tech, you created your own first business. Is that right? I mean, you were working on games. How
Yeah,
old
I
were
mean,
you when you
yeah.
started
Well, I don't even wasn't even thinking of a business. I was just coding up
doing it?
games. Yeah, and then ultimately, I started my cybersecurity career. Really, I would say in high school. A lot of people don't know this, but I got in. I found on the internet, and this is in 1990 timeframe, that the Department of Energy had a program where you could sign up, and I found it because it was like a website.
Uh-huh.
Oh, it wasn't even a website; it was Gopher. If
Yeah, something
pre
early out.
pre pre website because they didn't even
Yeah.
have browsers, to date it. But ultimately, they had a program to go out to Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and they invited me to go out there, and so in high school, got to work on supercomputers, and I shared with them my desire to write a program that would scan the network looking for vulnerabilities. They had a lot of security issues, and I was like, great, this could be it became kind of a symbiotic relationship because they had a network. They didn't know what was vulnerable. I wanted to build the software that would find those vulnerabilities. And so we worked out a deal where I'd write software, found the issues, they would go fix the issues, and then I would have to update for more issues. And so it became a flywheel. But ultimately, that software that I wrote is kind of what I released for free when I started at Georgia Tech as a freshman. And I got so much response from people all over the internet at that time, which was mostly universities and government sites, and NASA and others reached out. And
Oh,
one of
wow.
them, one of the guys at one of the security teams was like, "Hey, have you thought about commercializing?" And I always go back to that question that was like the spark that goes, you know what? Maybe I could sell this, and maybe this is a commercial opportunity. So that's where I decided to announce a commercial version. And in my dorm room, I got a check for $1,000 from an Italian research center. So I was like, woohoo, this validated early traction, and at that point, the more time I spent on it, I knew I had to either do the startup or um, focus on school. But you can't do both if you're at Georgia Tech. I don't, I don't recommend that.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question because I remember you left college to start ISS, and so you've told a bit of that story. Would you recommend that to burgeoning entrepreneurs to do that sort of thing? Just go for it, or is
Y-
if the times change nowadays?
You know what? And and part of my own journey has been to kind of reflect on what helped my pathway towards entrepreneurship, and also I've been blessed in that I was able to give some equity in my first startup to Georgia Tech, and out of that, as you mentioned in the intro, that
Yeah.
there's a Klaus building, due to the equity that Georgia Tech got. So I was fortunate that I would talk to students going, what are you working on? And like any college student, a lot of them have really cool ideas, problems they're working on, and I was like always asking them, kind of with that that question in mind of like, have you thought about commercializing this, or have you thought about turning it into a startup? And the biggest blocker at Georgia Tech, and my guess is this is true for most university students around the world, is that it's a cultural thing in that if they haven't even thought of it because you when I ask people what do you think is the biggest blocker for college students, usually it's like funding or any number of things that you would think, and it's like
Yeah.
no, they haven't even thought about startups, so there's not even I think as I uncovered that big gap between passionate kids that have big ideas and oh, could this be a startup, was kind of the genesis of where I went on the quest to figure out how do we get startups happening at Georgia Tech, and that's where CreateX emerged at Georgia Tech. Was kind of a combination of talking with some deans and different groups at Georgia Tech to finally figure out how to house it there and get support, and ultimately that program became to after 10 years now, it's the largest university accelerator in the world. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't
Wow.
realize that it's in our own backyard.
Yeah.
And we just had over 150 startups go through this accelerator, which puts it on par with um, the same size as like Y Combinator or any larger than almost any other accelerator out there. And with that, uh, we see that that's creating a whole new flywheel of you got kids building startups, you now have mentors helping those startups, and so and what I think is starting to happen in Atlanta um, is now there's enough deal flow, there's enough interesting startups that a lot of venture capitalists are starting to open up shops in Georgia, in
Yeah.
Atlanta, and so anyways, I think the big thing there is this is changing the culture at Georgia Tech and changing the ecosystem that's been here, but has been shifting and growing for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and that's great. It makes a lot of sense, and I know you have had a lot to do with changing the direction on that. I did want to go back and visit 2006 and selling the company. I think I'm right in saying it was maybe one of the biggest sales in history of Georgia. I remember in tag circles it was the news for a long time. But also so you can respond to that. But also I know that it wasn't always a bed of roses. I remember Tom Noonan telling stories about arbitraging credit cards and all kinds of things. So can you share a little bit of that story about, it wasn't a straight line to success. I remember you saying that, and Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the thing about startups is the reality is they're actually a lot of work. So if you don't like the
Yeah.
work, I definitely don't recommend it. But it's also and I think it helped that at the time I was like 20 years old. I couldn't even buy alcohol. I know that. I couldn't rent a car. So the good news is I could focus on a startup.
Yeah.
And I think with that, Tom also was young, and we both were committed to making this thing work. Because you will run into a lot of challenges, and we definitely ran into all kinds of challenges. And I think early on, a lot of it's people. Did you get the right person on board? Are they a good leader? This is where I'd say that that's probably the biggest challenge as early on is getting
Well,
all the right people. As you know, finding great people is hard, and so
yeah.
we always took the time, tried to find the best people. We ironically, I think something for startups, we did try to hire from early on, maybe somebody from IBM, and that was like a fish out of water because
Right.
IBM's culture and ISS's culture, even though we both had three-letter acronym names, the cultures were diverse, just diametrically opposed to each other early on because we were, everything we were doing, everybody wore multiple hats,
Yeah.
etc. And I think, you know, those would be definitely the two big things I'd say that we ran into. One is just getting the right people, and the other big challenge we had is we actually had to change our business model
Yeah.
multiple times. We went from software where you just download the software we had developed, and we continued with the software, but what we found in the cybersecurity world is if we wanted to sell into kind of with IT and networking, they didn't want to buy software. They wanted to buy uh, basically a hardware box that you plug into the rack. And so we had to get into the hardware business and make it instantly you just flip it on and turn it on in your environment. So we had to become experts in hardware. We didn't have that talent in house. Again, back to getting the right people on the ship or on the boat to help us do that. And then ultimately, um, we then transitioned. There was always battles with professional services. Like we had consultants, but in cybersecurity, it's kind of an ironic situation where when you hired consultants, some of them were like, "Hey, we want to consult and be agnostic and not sell the solution that we were building." And I'm like, "Well, that's kind of dumb because we're building a solution to help secure you. So there was always that thrashing between, hey, how do we keep everybody on the same page? And ultimately had some people trying to go off in different directions. So that was always a challenge. And we ended up doing managed security services, which is what some people would call SaaS today,
Hmm.
security, as a solution.
Yeah.
Um, and we ended up, you touched on that we got acquired by an IBM in 2006, but the biggest driver of it was actually our managed security services. And so
Okay.
IBM's entire infrastructure, a lot of people don't realize, and this is based on 2006 data. I don't know how they're set up today in terms of their org, but back then they really were two companies. IBM was. They were either a software hardware company or a services company,
Okay.
and we actually got acquired by the services side because they really wanted the managed security services. The
Okay.
challenge with that is it came with hardware and software, which was it took IBM almost like 5 years to figure out, maybe even longer, to figure out how to bring ISS's solution to work within that org. Just because hardware and software doesn't work inside a services org and vice versa, and so they kept moving it back and forth. Even though I wasn't there day to day, I'd keep in touch with Tom and others that were there, and it was interesting to hear the thrashing of the org structure. But ultimately, uh, IBM ended up taking security and making its own division, and predominantly that was ISS, formerly ISS, became the
Yeah.
the software division.
We were talking about the right people, and I think I'm right in saying that a lot of folks, and this is pretty typical, I think you'd agree, with scrappy startups that build companies and bring in the right people, that a lot of them have gone on to be successful beyond that, right? That work there.
Yeah, no, yeah. So a lot of the teams that we worked with early on, I mean, almost everybody has moved into some level of startups coming out of it.
Yeah.
just as well as uh, like Tom and myself, we're all helping the next generation of founders. So
Yeah.
it's what you learn and how you want to give back. I think that's something I ask all the students that do a startup is, hey, we're helping you, but we'd love to have you help the next generation
Yeah.
of students, and that becomes that flywheel that
Yeah.
is a win-win for everyone.
Yeah. And you were, would you say, pioneers in the security space now, like around the boardrooms all over the world, people are talking about security. How much is it changing? What's going to be happening if you kind of put the crystal ball out there in the next, several years in terms of security? Are a lot of the startups you work with in that security space, or it's really all over the map?
Um, I I personally work with all kinds of startups
Yeah.
because I'm where I've focused is more the stage and target in that um I guess where I focus right now is mostly university partnerships like Georgia Tech with
Yeah.
CreateX, et cetera. So you can't get earlier than that much. I would say we're actually pre-startup, right? We're actually talking to students, and they don't even have a
Interesting.
startup. They may not
Yeah.
even have an idea. Quite honestly, like this summer, we ran a program for fellow students, where they were looking for an internship, and we're like, hey, here's an internship. We're gonna pay you, and for the first time in the history of internships, we're going to pay you to work on your own startup. And they didn't even have a startup idea at the time. So we ended up ideating and helping them come up with ideas and had them building startups. So I think it's so that's kind of where we target is so early, but the ideas are all over, from consumer to enterprise to cyber to AI is obviously a big theme.
Yeah.
I One thing about cybersecurity, though, that made it always exciting is that every new technology wave, you know, internet being kind of the initial one, but then you had mobile, then you had, in the cloud. It's all these different waves of as we've seen the evolution emerge, and now AI. Um, Security has to be a part of all of that. And I
Yeah.
think that's the piece where if you're asking me like, hey, where's it going? Well, all you got to do is track where's technology going in general, and
Yeah.
then the nice thing about that is there's always new opportunity to roll out new security startups that are
Yeah.
targeting. Today it's AI, it's crypto, it's any of those areas that are emerging.
Yeah. No, that's great. After ISS, you've had a string of activities that you've done, not surprising, in addition to all the mentoring you've done. But Kaniva, Auto Recruitment, Neurolaunch, Cyberlaunch, Fusen World. This is a big question, but talk a little bit about the journey from, okay, now you sold a company, you've got some money, uh, you've earned it, and now you're jumping right back in and doing a bunch of different things. I mean, what was your thinking in terms of, because this is most leading with relevance is about leadership. We like to talk about leadership and how people like describe their own personal journeys.
Yeah. I guess the thought process for me was kind of just there's really two or three things that I did early on. I think um there's one of the areas that I'm still very interested in, but like Kaniva is a good example where if I had to time it, I was probably very too early if
Okay.
with the startup. And the reason being is I think with the AI that's emerging, you're seeing how video can be done. The AI generation is starting to occur for images, for video,
Yeah.
and now you're gonna see it for virtual worlds where you could just type in a world and boom, it's created. And that was kind of the vision I had. But the algorithms didn't exist, 20 years ago or 15
Right.
years ago when I started that. They are starting to emerge today. My guess is over the next 5 years, you'll see gaming itself will transform into an AI driven virtual worlds. Is It's a trend that I think will continue. Um, so I think those that was one big theme that lessons you learned where timing, business model, those things don't always line up. So learned some stuff there, but ultimately the other area that I have like, and you mentioned it, Neural Launch, Cyber Launch, CreateX. These were all accelerators that I helped kick off, and with those, really around the formation of ideas and startups and how to go from zero to one in terms of, how do you take an idea and execute it to get one customer or get some customers, et cetera. Um, that's been the area that I'm most interested in nowadays, and that we're helping solve that problem. And I still don't think we've cracked the nut yet because we're only doing, several hundred startups. And the reality is there's millions of students around the world, whether it's in the US, but also we're starting to build partnerships in Latin America. We're doing
Okay.
stuff in Chile with the University of Concepcion. One of the other interesting opportunities that emerged was the head of research at Georgia Tech was Lebanese, or he was Lebanese, in that he's now become the president of the Lebanese American University. But he invited me to Lebanon, and we visited the American University of Beirut, and ended up partnering with AUB. And so we've actually been helping fund companies out of Beirut, and really startups that are top
Yeah.
notch.
Wow.
But I think that's just the beginning because I'd love to figure out how to partner with other universities. There's thousands of universities with great
Yeah.
talent, and I think there's a unique opportunity because I think I can bring, because they're students pre actual startups. We're actually going there saying, hey, we'll help you set up a U.S. Delaware Corp. We'll help you get a U.S. bank account. We'll help you set up a U.S. funding and all that. So that's changing the dynamics so that they're thinking globally from day zero. When they get go, historically they would set up a company. If you're in Chile, for example, you'd
Me and
set up a
Chile.
Chilean startup. But what
Yeah.
we're doing is like, no, let's help you set up a U.S. company because, quite frankly, if you want to raise money right now, it's a good time to come to the U.S. and raise money, and higher chance than say there's not a lot of VCs or venture capitalists down in other parts of the world. So whether it's
Yeah.
Latin America or Europe or Asia, I still think there's a and the more we can set it up in the U.S. so that it's the IP is protected here.
Yeah.
It's a big market. How do we get you to set up a U.S. office here? So I think Atlanta could be a nice soft landing for companies around the world to, we've got the world's largest airport in our backyard. We might as well use it to fly some startup entrepreneurs here.
Yeah. So under the category, you know it when you see it, since you've funded, invested, talked to thousands of young entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurs, as you said, some of them aren't, don't know they're going to be entrepreneurs yet. Do you have an eye on entrepreneurs that will be successful? I mean, what are the key traits? I'm sure now you're probably can pretty quickly usually pick it out, pick them out.
I, you know, I think some people try to figure out, what's the DNA of the
Yeah.
entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
Um, to me, it's almost. I think it's a myth, to be honest.
Okay.
And the reason being is, I mean, there's some things that are skill. To me, it's probably skill based.
Uh-huh.
And these are all skills you can learn. Like I couldn't speak in public before I did my startup because I've never done it, right? And
Mm.
and quite honestly, I probably wasn't that great, for the until I got some, until I started doing it, and ultimately I had people give me recommendations, and I took a speech coaching,
Yeah.
and ultimately became good at it. So, you know, I would say there are some people that maybe have some of the charisma, but in general, there's definitely founders that I've met that probably don't. You wouldn't say, oh, that's the charisma you need for an entrepreneur. They're focused, they're level-headed. There's probably some attributes. I would say, willing to solve problems you have to
Yeah.
have. And that's why I target engineering. I might be biased in that when I'm filtering, I'm already filtered that, hey, they got into college,
Yeah.
right? They're in a top school, so you had to get filtered that way. But also, you have the confidence to solve problems. I think that's something that you got to be able to do. Communication is important. But if you can solve problems, pick a big problem to solve, with a unique opportunity, and yeah. The other thing I think that's been helpful, especially for Georgia Tech students, is it's Georgia Tech, I think, has kind of a humble kind of culture approach to it. It's not about ego or showing off. It's kind of like, let's go build this. And
Yeah.
I think that carries over into that's the kind of people I like to back, or people that aren't there for ego. That, oh, look at my car, or look at my,
Yeah.
how much money I've been able to spend. I'm more interested in finding people that want to solve a problem. Think about, is this a worthwhile problem to solve? And I think those are some of the. And the other thing I would argue, Tino, is we typically want you to try to find a co-founder. So
Okay.
instead of having the perfect person, can you get two people that believe in your idea? You and somebody else, and that I think that lowers the risk early on. That if nobody wants to join your startup, that's probably a sign as well, right? And so there's a little bit of a built-in filter there, and
Yeah.
I think strengths and weaknesses usually show up in those early teams, right? You got hopefully a couple of strengths that play off each other. And that's what ended up with Tom and I. Ultimately I brought him in as president. He became
Yeah.
CEO, and it worked out well because I was like, look, I like technology. I like building. I like the technical vision of where we're going. And Tom, you was more of the sales, marketing kind of um, getting up and rallying the troops, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it was a good combination there. And so I think, yeah, or I get that those would be some of the attributes I'd like to look at, maybe more on a team basis as opposed to a single
Yeah.
savior for the company, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good point. It sounds like, the people that are successful know they're probably can't do it all, or they're not necessarily have the skill sets and everything. So they're set their ego aside, and it's like, okay, here's what I'm good at. I need to find somebody that's good at these other things to be successful. So I mean, that's a really good lesson to be learned. And sometimes that's hard for people. I would think sometimes, particularly with some of the startups, I've seen situations where maybe they're really product driven or, technology driven, but they're not necessarily doing the CEO thing or, rallying the troops, like you said. So that's a really good point. I wanted to shift over Fusen World. So how's it different from other startup accelerators? And well, I guess I'll stop there and just tell people about what that is exactly.
Yeah, so while we targeted universities to partner with, one of the things that we found is that, like Georgia Tech has CreateX, which has its own accelerator. And we've chatted with all the other universities in Georgia, or at least the big ones. Georgia State, KSU, Emory. Every one of them have, Spelman, Morehouse. They
Yeah.
all have accelerators. Um, and after building three of them, Neural Launch, Cyber Launch, CreateX, uh, I there's probably a need to automate a lot of the infrastructure that makes kind of the back office of an accelerator. And so one of the things we're building is kind of a platform for making accelerators. Um, and what goes into an accelerator? It's a program. There's a start date. There's an end date. There's curriculum. There's mentors. There's investors. All of that stuff is kind of what we're building into this platform, so that there's structure for founders to find the mentors, find the investors, and then we're overlaying it with some solutions that, as we identify what would help founders the most. And this year, the big thing we're looking at is AI,
Yeah.
being not just a how do I go on here and talk to Chat GPT and ask some, questions,
Yeah.
but one of the areas that we're right now focusing on is AI coding. And how does an AI coding platform help a startup go from idea to, can we help you build out your website? Can we build out your back end? Can we make that whole process go from might have taken you a month to, can we do it in an hour or less? Those are the things that we really want to drive, the capability of a founder partnered with AI to build to build your startup in what might have taken 3 months. Can you do it in a day? And I think I'm optimistic that we're going to see more startups happening way faster, um, and being able to be tested much quicker to see, like, is this an idea worth pursuing? And how do you find customers? How do you a lot of that stuff's going to be AI driven anyways.
Yeah.
And so we want to enable that capability, with Fusion.
So it sounds like you're pressing the envelope a bit with schools and all related to AI and other emerging technologies. It fits nicely with my next question because AI is evolving fast, obviously. Are colleges like Georgia Tech, and if Georgia Tech's not doing them, assuming others are behind them, are they in need to change their curriculum to ready students for the future related to how to apply AI, or are, are they keeping in step with that? I guess my question.
Yeah, Georgia Tech's, along with any engineering school, I probably would say I think they're all learning.
Yeah.
It- it- so I know at Georgia Tech, the policy, which I think is the right policy, is they allow the professors to decide how much AI is supported or not.
Hmm.
So there's not one policy at Georgia Tech. So it comes down to the professor and how much he or she wants to enable. And so I think
Okay.
you can end up with classes that have 100% AI kind of engagement, and then you might end up in a class where, hey, we don't want you to use any AI. And
Yeah.
obviously that policy is tougher nowadays because it's
Yeah.
too damn convenient to be like, can I at least get a draft written by AI and then tweak it and
Yeah.
hopefully make it your own? Or in some cases, I'm sure there's been quite a few students that copy and paste the whole thing. But ultimately, you know, I, there and so there's been some emergence around how do you stop cheating with, how do you
Yeah.
detect whether you have AI answers or not? I mean, all those things have been challenges. I look at it more from um, you know, are these kids capable with AI? Because it's kind of.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, one thing that I think is really key. I've had some people say, "Oh, because AI can code, you don't have to learn coding anymore," and it's kind of like the worst advice I could imagine, because it's actually kind of like saying, "Oh, there's a calculator. You don't have to learn math anymore."
Yeah.
And I just equate it the same way. I'm like, why would you not want to learn math? I mean, you're
Yeah.
just because you can do a calculator doesn't mean you should not learn math. And I think coding's the same way. If you really want to build, you want to learn how to speak coding because ultimately that's what's going to make you great at working with the AI to build the stuff you want to build. Because if you don't know how to code, then it's you may not be able to. You won't have the ability to be as effective with the AI. So I'd point that out as a major myth or flaw in people's advice right now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So, since this is about leadership, I have a few questions related to that. Um, how would you say your leadership style has evolved over the years?
That's a good question. I have a small team, so I try to. I don't know. I guess I took a lot of the stuff I've learned from ISS and applied it. I actually ended up taking some leadership slash org structure classes at Stanford
Oh,
one summer where I was like, hey, I need ISS has grown to a certain size and I don't quite understand. Um, my mindset was more on the technical level.
right.
And but with leadership and trying to understand how do you organize the organization, that was very eye-opening and helpful to understand. So I think continuing that path of learning and taking classes and I read probably every book on leadership, at least all the big ones, and so I don't know if it's I'm sure I can always be better, but ultimately it's being open, getting feedback from others, and
Yeah.
you know working with work and find a great team to work with.
So, I usually ask everyone that's on the podcast similar question around uh, failure times in your career. Maybe one thing you would want to point out, because a lot of times, at least for me, you learn more through a misstep or a failure than you do with you know, with a success. Any feelings about that or stories to share?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I'd say Kaniva was um, a series of failures in that there's probably you look back, there's probably any number of things that were mistakes. So the one
Yeah,
thing I'll say, but I'll say we made a ton of mistakes at ISS as well. For me, it felt like if we were more than 50% right, then we were doing something right.
yeah,
Um, and because I think every organization has failure. So
yeah,
one of the things that I would say I've adopted that I don't think we were doing at ISS, but I did learn at Caneva um, because I was focused on consumer is you can fail. But with technology, what's nice now, definitely once you get customers, you can kind of fail fast, and
yeah.
you have to build in failure. Um, and the engineering wise, so much of our failures, I would say, came from and I think the thing that helped me was just framing it always as experiments. Like these are experiments. We're going to learn from them. And that kind of sets you up to go it sounds less harsh if you have failure with an experiment as opposed to, these aren't decisions that I'd like to say I'm always right, but more times than not, I'm actually wrong. And so a lot of times we'll build something and you roll it out and you're like, all right, this is supposed to help drive more customers to, spend money or do X,
Right.
Y, Z. And so one of the key things that you quickly learn is you got to measure that. And if you're failing, the nice thing is if you plan up front for failure and it's baked into your technology, they have feature flags where you can turn them on and off. So you're like, oh, I just rolled out this major feature. If that's not working, that saved us so many times because we didn't have to do an update. We just simply flipped a
That's a
switch,
good point. Yeah,
And so
yeah,
I would just argue, for founders, be like, look, be humble. You're not going to be right all the time, and the one way to guarantee that you do have some success in that regard once you get going is build it into your culture that you're data driven. Let the data be the answer, not your ego. So
Yeah, it's interesting when you said 50% or better. That's pretty good. I was listening to recently to Roger Federer's commencement speech. I don't know if you ever listened to him, the famous tennis player. He said he only won 53% of his shots, but nevertheless, he was the GOAT. And
yeah, if you can win 53%, you can bring down the house in Vegas, right?
there you go. Good point. Don't take that advice and go to Vegas now, guys. But yeah,
No, that if you can win 50, all you need is 51% and you're
yeah,
you're ahead. So
that's true. So we're pretty close to wrapping up, but what's next for you? Are there some exciting projects or initiatives you're looking at? You're in the middle of so many things.
the main thing will be this year and going into next year will be um, the AI will be central to our
Okay.
experience. I think some people are like, isn't AI done? I think AI is actually just beginning. If I look
Yeah.
at where we're at with this is kind of like this is a night, when the browser first came out and people are like, is the internet a fad?
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like AI hasn't even come close to its full potential. And if you're in the AI space, it's like every other week, if you're paying attention, there's always a new model coming out. There's some new announcement. There's some new unlocked capability that didn't exist a week ago.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's going to be a wave that we're going to ride for probably the next 5 years. And with that, though, I'd say I want to help scale in two different ways. One is scaling it probably on a global basis. How do we scale what we're doing to have impact globally? Because I think um, one thing I'm seeing is, if you look at the world, and kind of how the U.S. policy is playing out with tariffs. I think you're going to see a lot more of the smartest students in the world may not come to the U.S.
Right.
If we're being honest about kind
Yeah.
of the message we're sending.
Yeah.
And so if they're gonna stay in their own country's top universities, et cetera, how do we partner with those universities? I still want the best and brightest to be building solutions, whether you're here in the US, you know,
Yeah.
but also, want to enable the same kind of culture shift globally. And I think that's something that I see as an opportunity is I want to scale it that way. And the other way to look at it is kind of along that journey. We've targeted students, but as you know, or I lived it going from student to how do you get your startup off the ground full time? You're no longer
Yeah.
a student. How do you go from 0 to 1? But then how do you go from 1 to 10? Whether that's employees or customers or and then how do you get to 1,000 employees? Each of those stages is a very different set of complexity unlocks, so to speak.
Right.
I almost can progressive complexity, and I think that's an area where we can help provide a lot of guidance to say, hey, how do you go from those early steps to how do you become a billion-dollar company? Um, uh, the more we can help map that out, the more founders can kind of rely on those patterns, and get measurements that say, hey, are you doing good? Are you not doing good? Half of it is just knowing the data to be like, all right, how are other startups navigating this? And then
Yeah.
providing that information back to them to say, look, you're doing great, but here's what the best startups are doing, and how do we unlock that?
Yeah. Well, Chris, we're out of time. So thanks for everything you've done for not just Georgia and entrepreneurs and Georgia Tech, but really globally. Everyone, I certainly appreciate you and what you've done. And thanks for joining me on Leading with Relevance.
Absolutely. Great to be here, Tina. Thanks.